Hey everyone, so coming at you again from the car, and these videos have turned into me more just sharing my thoughts out loud rather than necessarily planning specific topics. And I hope that's okay, because I always come from a place of good intention when I make these videos, because I'm still unraveling this journey myself and still trying to figure out, why am I susceptible to waves? Why am I susceptible to setbacks? Although I live a full life now, I still feel like there's more going on. And again, as I dive deeper into, I was watching a video this morning on someone who has recovered from chronic dizziness, and several of the clients that I've coached have this problem after drug withdrawal or drug reactions. And the person who was telling the story of recovery, she was saying how like ultimately the solution is nervous system regulation. And it was very interesting, because that and another video I watched where someone had recovered from mold toxicity, lupus, autoimmunity, things that we don't think of as being related at all to withdrawal, but it's so eerily similar. And the people's stories are so eerily similar. The symptoms, the patterns, the histories are so similar. Chronic fatigue syndrome, multiple chemical sensitivities. I've been sharing this more and more. And in these videos, someone described how when they go on vacation, their symptoms are gone, they come back, and everything comes back. And I have noticed this consistently in coaching clients, that they will feel better on vacation or totally symptom free. And it's like as soon as they come back through the door or even think about returning home, their symptoms come back. And so why is that? And if we're going down the path of brain injury, permanency, that makes absolutely no logical sense, just on a basic level. And the key to these other people recovering was nervous system regulation, but it goes deeper than that. So in these videos, people were talking about prior to the incident, whether they got COVID, whether they took a drug, whatever it was that sort of triggered their severe symptoms, they uncover what was going on leading up to that. And the reason I share this is because I have had a bucket theory now for the last while, and trying to figure out my own patterns for myself and patterns in people that I talk to. And it's interesting because most people, and I've noticed this pattern, and they're uncovering this in these videos as well, that people who are more prone to these problems tend to be overachievers. They tend to be very hard on themselves. They tend to be empaths. They tend to be more sensitive to begin with. They tend to suppress their emotions. They tend to be more escapers, as I call it. So they tend to maybe have a history of trauma or stress building up, and this can be chemical, it can be emotional, psychological, whatever, and then something tips them over into severe symptoms. I've shared this in many videos, and for myself that was certainly the case when I uncover all the layers leading up to the drug withdrawal. And this would also fall in line with limbic kindling. So we talk a lot about kindling in the community when people reinstate the drug, but there's kindling that happens even outside of psychiatric drugs. If you saw a couple videos ago, I was reading from the book Wired for Healing, and it talks about limbic kindling, and multiple different stressors can lead to this, not just drug reactions. And basically your system, the threshold for stress is getting lower and lower, and the hypersensitivity of the nervous system is getting higher and higher and higher. And this is due to some type of trauma going on to the body. So in my own situation, if I look back and really perceive it in hindsight, my first withdrawal, when I came off citalopram, which I had used for 7 years for situational depression, I came off in 4 weeks. And my life was somewhat stressful at the time. I was in a relationship that was rocky, but it was okay still. But I was in dire financial problems. And this is what led to me coming off the antidepressant, because I was like, I can't afford anything that's not keeping me alive. And I didn't think that the drug was doing much at that point. So I was working 4 jobs, and I went into withdrawal, and I was still functional-ish in my first withdrawal. The first 6 months were terrible. I had constant looping intrusive thoughts. I had panic attacks, crying episodes. I was very irritable. I had swinging between insomnia and fatigue. I had headaches, brain zaps, all of those types of things, but I remained functional. I had to. I mean, I was so broke that I had collectors calling me. I was defaulting on my car payments, my loan payments, and it was getting to the point where I was blocking collectors' calls every day. They were calling me from multiple different numbers. I was in a lot of trouble. Trashing my credit, considering filing for bankruptcy. It was really bad. And so I go off the drug, I experience all these symptoms, but my life can't stop because I have to continue working so much because my finances are so bad. So at the 6-month mark, so at that point I had been working so much and I was starting to make dents in my finances. So my stress from that was coming down. My relationship stuff was, it was not great, but it was kind of leveling out and I was getting more comfortable again in the relationship, and my symptoms disappeared overnight. And this never made sense to me because, I go through life and I'm pretty much totally symptom free just overnight. And then 7 months later, my symptoms came back and and I spent so much time trying to figure out what made my symptoms come back. I looked through all my financial records. I looked through my journals, my diaries after this happened, and I kind of was piecing it together, and I never took anything. So I'm like, why did my symptoms come back? And I had a theory for a long time because I was still drinking, but I was drinking when my symptoms vanished as well. So then I was like, what brought it back? And when I think more in terms of this is a bucket thing, our systems are becoming more sensitized due to stress and these drug reactions, it just hits to the nervous system. When my symptoms came back, when I think back, it was right at the time. So I was home for Easter break, which should have been a relaxing time, and it was in a sense, but my life back home where I was living with my boyfriend was chaotic. So I had just switched jobs because I needed to make more money because I was still in bad financial problem. I was working for the federal government. It was super stressful. My relationship I knew was over, but I had been in it for 4 years. I had uprooted my entire life for him, and I was terrified. I mean, I hadn't lived at home in 17 years. I felt like I couldn't go back to my previous city, which also wasn't my hometown, because I had given up my wonderful job that I loved to move with this man. So I hated my job. I knew my relationship was over. My finances were terrible. And I had all of these things just brewing. But I've been the type of person my whole life pretty much too. I was always suppressing my emotions. I was always running from things. I was never taught to talk. I came from a home that was very loving in a lot of ways, but not in the sense that we were emotionally close. I never felt safe to talk about things. We weren't a family that talked about anything. And so I learned to suppress emotions and just, go along to get along, and came from a very strict religious background. Felt unsafe to express myself in ways outside of that. So just a lot of suppression. And so my symptoms come back. I'm living in denial, essentially, that my life sucks. I hated, I needed to end my relationship. Like I said, I was working all these jobs. I had switched to this federal government job. I hated it. I had no friends. I was resenting the fact that I had given up my great life to move for this man, and now the relationship was sucking. I was realizing it was quite toxic. And so my symptoms had come back. And so I finally get the courage to end the relationship and move back home. And, again, still in bad financial situation, working too much, unhappy because I felt like I was losing everything that I had built up because I had been on my own for 17 years and just a lot of things. And I wonder now if this is what keeps this kind of stuff going. Again, these are just theories. And so, I've always been someone very driven. I tie a lot of my self-worth to how much I can achieve. That's something that's been ingrained in me from a young age as well. I've always been a hustler. I've always felt I need to prove my worth. So I'm always pushing myself past my limits. So I did that, and then, I reinstate because I'm functioning, but mentally I'm so bad, just extremely bad looping thoughts still. And they're not going away this time. They went away after 6 months the first time, and now, gone for 7 months, came back with no real specific provocation. And then, pretty much all of my physical symptoms have dropped off. I was sleeping well. I was calm in my body. I was not having panic attacks anymore. My moods were much more level. But I was still looping. And so I just couldn't take it anymore. So I reinstate and my system blows up and I go into just extreme symptoms. And then I lose all functioning and, lose my jobs that I'd been working for. Luckily, I'd paid off most of my debt at that point, so things weren't as financially dire. Then things just implode and I'm housebound and I'm barely functioning. I'm suicidal. It's, now I have neurological symptoms, muscle jerking, vibrations, burning, tinnitus, which I hadn't had. And everything's just getting worse and worse. And so then, I'm really bad again for 6 months. Just like in my first pattern, but on a worse scale now. 6 months, I start getting windows. In my first withdrawal, I felt cured at 6 months, even though it eventually came back. The second time, I started getting like 1 hour windows here and there at 6 months. But I'm still really bad mentally, hallucinating, having like tactile hallucinations, horrible intrusive thoughts, just severe. I've outlined those in other videos. All these neurological symptoms. And feeling more sensitive to things. I had a setback from hair dye. I mean, stuff that I'd never even thought of before. And so then my escape is sex. And, I'm starting to get windows. I felt somewhat, so this is my toxic ex, but I'm so desperate for any level of escape at that point, any semblance of feeling good, feeling happy. Because at one time I was very, very happy with him, very happy. And so I'm trying so desperately to conjure up those happy feelings again, reunite with him. We had been apart for I don't know, like we'd been broken up for 1.5 years at that point, get back together. I get pregnant. Never thought that was possible. So then, think about termination of the pregnancy. My hormones make everything much worse again. I am pacing and just terrible. But my mom and grandma and some family members rally around me. They're like, we're going to get you through this. So I push through. I have the baby, almost die having the baby, had severe HELLP syndrome, preeclampsia, near almost dead. I had to have rushed to the children's hospital by ambulance 3 hours away, have my baby at 7.5 months pregnant. She's in the NICU. We both almost die. So another traumatic experience. And then, about 6 months later, my symptoms really shift and I feel like I'm getting better. So this is when I start posting success stories. Once I had been feeling better consistently for a few months, and I'm telling people, long timers that I'd been in the withdrawal experience with, I'm finally healing. I'd been sick for so long, but I still feel susceptible. And then I get COVID. So I had been feeling well for about a year, from November 22 to November 23. I get COVID in November 23, and I feel like I'm sensitive again. I'm like, why does this keep happening to me? What is going on in my body? And again, the more I talk to people, the more I watch videos of people having success turning around conditions that are eerily similar to withdrawal, but they call it something else. They all talk about not only nervous system re-regulation, but also examining. It almost forces you to face things in your life that maybe, and again, this is not about blaming. And I've noticed in these videos, they always say that this is not about blaming. None of this is your fault. And none of this is a mind over matter thing. It's just that your brain is kind of wiring itself to be in this hypervigilant state, the more assaults it has to it. And so you're starting to perceive the world as threatening, dangerous, and that can become extreme where food is dangerous, and not just like you think it's dangerous. Your body is producing physical symptoms in response to food, electricity, Wi-Fi, chemicals, like everything. And if you watched my video from a couple videos ago from the book Wired for Healing, she talks about all of this in that book. So go back and watch that if you haven't. And just how your body is becoming more and more sensitized by these traumas. And this is like chemical trauma, physical trauma, emotional trauma. It's filling the bucket. Your threshold is getting lower and lower. And so how do you get out of this? And this is where I talk about neural retraining. There's tons of different programs, NLP, DNRS, that I talk about. But in people that I've talked to, and I talk to people at all stages of recovery, sometimes that only brings them to a certain level of healing. Then when the people that I've seen in full healing, where they're not susceptible, well, they might be susceptible to flares for a long time, but they're uncovering more and more layers. What led up to this? Were you already having your bucket filled before this drug event? Just, if you can just open your mind to think about it. Personality traits. For me, it was religious trauma as well. It was, this type A empathic personality. It was all of the suppression of emotions. I had all kinds of traumatic events prior. My dad abandoning the family. I'd been through assaults. I'd been through narcissistic relationships. All of these things, and suppress. I had an alcohol problem for years, which I think was partly due to the citalopram, because it can cause alcohol cravings, but also it just further was suppressing emotions, suppressing trauma. And again, in recovery stories, I see consistently people are neuro rewiring, teaching their body and brain safety again through many different modalities to this, but then also uncovering layers beyond that. Are you someone who has suppressed their emotions? Are you someone who lives in denial? Sounds really bad, but I'm talking about myself here, and you can think about if it applies to you as well. Someone that tends to always live in denial. I tend to ignore my own feelings. I'm always trying to please other people. I am just not in tune, and I don't do enough self-care. I don't, and it sounds so oversimplified, but again, in stories of people with these complex conditions, they're talking about making time for play. They're talking about doing things like deep breathing, and they'll even say, oh, I thought this was a bunch of crap when I started, and it actually made me feel worse, which is common in this community as well. But it's your brain and nervous system put up this resistance because they're like, no, we're trying to keep you safe. You can't let your guard down. We're here to protect you. We got to keep firing symptoms at you, and so it can actually get worse. But it's actually almost like it can be a good sign, and right away we perceive it as more danger, so we pull away. And I'm not talking about like taking medications. I'm not saying that, although that could be part of it for some people. Again, I'm not opposed to reinstatement in the sense that I don't think in extremes. Do I think these drugs are shit? Yes, I do. Do I think it's an easy answer for everybody? No. Have I seen reinstatement save lives? Yes. But this isn't about reinstatement. This is about how are you perceiving safety again? How are you getting back to a place and uncovering the layers that may have been building up leading to these events? And this might not be the case for everybody, but the more that I uncover of these things, the more that I'm like, this is very, very interesting. And people tend to be so hard on themselves. And I've seen another thing too, and I've talked to people who have recovered from drug injury specifically, and myself too, where it's like, you might have been someone who's very hard on yourself, and this like teaches you and forces you almost to have compassionate self-talk, to be nice to yourself. Why do people get help or feel comfort from coaches? It's the way that they're supporting them. And so if you can do that to yourself, it's essentially what it's bringing down, and it's raising the hope and raising the feeling of safety. That's what it's doing. So if you can do that to yourself, it's all part of the process, and there's a lot of self-blame in this. Some people, I notice a lot of people internalize the blame. Some people, some people will, it feels more external, like they're angry at the doctors and they're angry at God, but there's a lot of like internalizing as well, and these are all complex problems, don't get me wrong. I'm just trying to uncover them through all of this research, and I think it's just so interesting. And when I look back now through the lens of what I know, it almost was inevitable that I was gonna have these problems that I had, just because it's just how the nervous system works. It's trying to protect you, and so it's sensing more and more danger as you have all of these traumas layering up. And so it's wiring in. It's not in your head, so to speak, like where it's just a psychological process. It's wiring in. That's how like trauma works. And I'm not a trauma expert, but I'm learning about how traumatic incidents like imprint in the body and cause physical symptoms. I've shared this as well in videos about, you know, people who have recovered from histamine and mast cell activation syndrome, and how it's not about the food, it's about the unconscious, often it's unconscious associations of danger that your brain and nervous system are perceiving, because again, the process of recovery is not about narrowing down more foods. That often backfires on people. And why is that? It's because it's the perception of danger. And I'm not saying that you should eat like crap and you should eat garbage, and people do have certain triggers, and if it's very consistent, then you should listen to that. I'm just talking like, you know, a lot of times, like when there's no consistent pattern, but you're trying to make an association, it's your brain perceiving threat. And so your world is becoming smaller. Your ability to eat foods is becoming smaller. Your ability to leave the house, to leave your bed, to leave a dark room, it's getting smaller and smaller. And it's because your nervous system and brain are perceiving so much danger that it's doing everything to protect itself and keep itself safe and alive. So hopefully this is making some semblance of sense. Let me know your thoughts on this, and your own pattern. And I hope people aren't feeling like this is anything about blame. Again, none of it's your fault. It's just what is, you know, what happens in the nervous system when there's just stressor upon stressor upon stressor, building up this inflammation and lowering the stress threshold and just trying to keep you alive. So anyway, I'll wrap things up, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.